Please excuse me if this ebook is not perfect. My AI voice may screw up the pronunciation or timing, but laugh, move on, and enjoy. Warning. This book has been written using down-to-earth language and contains many colloquialisms from the north of England. It's intended to entertain and not offend. It's difficult to write a book using words and phrases that will be understood on both sides of the Atlantic. But I did try to meet you halfway, and if all else fails, you can always phone a friend. If you are a prude or feel that you may not be able to understand the content, please don't buy this hilarious book. If you have decided to ignore the well-intended warnings, thank you for buying it and enjoy. If you are reading it in a bookstore, please take it to the cashier and pay for it. The worst that can happen is you will learn how not to write a book at a bargain price. But if you decide not to buy it, I can only say you don't know what you are missing. Memories of a Nobody by Alan Hodgkiss. George Moore wisely said that a gentleman travels the world over in search of what he needs and returns home to find it. And I proved it, time and time again. This book is dedicated to the best parents and brother in the world. I am so fortunate and so proud we were a true family. My wife Rita, thanks for all the years and your love, sweetie. All my friends, I did it. Now you buy it. You may be in it. It all began on the 3rd of September 1939, when war was solemnly declared between Germany and England. Then shortly after, a somewhat different declaration was made by my parents. As a result of these two actions, I was born in Bolton on the 8th of July 1940 into a world of turmoil, noise, and frequent blackouts. I didn't realize at that time, I was too busy learning how to pee and poo, that the worst had yet to come, toffee rationing. It was hard growing up exchanging clothes coupons for the more important dolly mixtures, etc. However, in contrast to the nappy, there was a silver lining to this introduction to life. It taught me the art of bartering, which has been of great help to this date. Having set the main themes of this book, weird sense of humor and the art of creative bargaining, I will attempt to recall enough details of my somewhat different life, and the odd joke, to keep your interest. At worst, you will throw it away, or throw up. My father Bob was a coach painter, and mother Phyllis a cotton weaver. I say this to let you know from the start that I was not born with a silver spoon in my mouth. My upbringing was based on love and morality, for which I am so grateful. Early years, 1940 to 1958. By now, you may or may not be glad that I'm still around to write this book. An attempt was made a long time ago to stop me, in that some German aircraft, I like to think it wasn't one of ours, dropped a bomb close to our house and a piece of shrapnel flew through our living room window. Luckily, my mother had just moved my pram from its usual place under the window and I survived to tell the tale. I hope you're as happy as me. You will appreciate, or you sure as hell will later on. Memory fades with age, and reciting events in a strict chronological order is quite difficult without the benefit of lifelong notes. As keeping diaries was not a common pastime of people in the northwest of England in my days, I am forced to relate the early years in a somewhat fragmented style. I am sure you will understand. My earliest recollection is when I had my tonsils removed. After being sat on by a nurse, I must have just looked like a ripple in the blanket. I was put in what I remember as an upside-down saddle and made to gag by this sadist in a white coat. Probably all wrong, but that's what I remember. I do recall quite vividly a street party, Talbot Street, Astley Bridge, in celebration of some victory over Germany or Japan. In any event, it felt good at the time that we had apparently beat somebody at what the whole world seemed to like to do, which was fight. At least that's what they had been doing since I was born. I hope it wasn't because of me. Our neighbor, Mr. Crompton, came to our house once. He stood at the front door and complained to my ma'am that I had told him, for some good reason I assumed, to piss off. My up until now genteel ma'am replied, "Then why don't you?" and closed the door. This surprised the hell out of me as my ma'am wouldn't even eat tomato ketchup, let alone swear. But I suppose her remark was just a polite comment, and not swearing. My first day at school ended later than it should have. The school on Newnham Street was just round the corner from our modest, low-rent, terraced house. When the other kids laid down for their afternoon nap, I nipped home for a chocolate biscuit. My embarrassed ma'am took me back, and the grinning teacher promptly sent me to bed. I was still sleeping, in the biggest bedroom I have ever slept in, after the other kids had gone home. When I finally awoke, I was asked, not made, to assist the teacher to put away all the camp beds before I was allowed to go home. I took my snack to school after that. For as far back as I can remember, I have had a very annoying habit of telling people the price of gifts and where I bought them. I've no idea why I do this. It may be a subconscious thought that they won't like the gift and will want to return it to the shop. I believe the first time this happened was when I bought my granddad a pipe for his birthday. He was leaning on the gable end, as one does at his age, and I gave him the present. He grunted something about it being very nice, and I replied, "It should be for 1 and 6 pence. That's an old money, of course." He smiled and asked me where I had bought it. I never saw the pipe again. We'll blame him for my childish philosophy. Talking of presents reminds me of, a little boy wanted £100 very badly, and his mother told him to pray to God for it. He prayed for 2 weeks, but nothing turned up. So he decided to write God a letter. When the postal authorities received the letter addressed to God, they decided to send it to the Prime Minister, who was so amused by the letter that he instructed his secretary to send the lad a check for £5, which he thought would be a lot of money for a little boy. The boy was delighted, and he wrote a thank you letter that went as follows: "Dear God, thank you very much for sending me the money. I noticed that you sent it via the government, and, as usual, those bastards deducted 95%. The years rolled by and were spent climbing trees, wading in rivers with new shoes on, having cuts painfully stitched and teeth out, with no anesthetic, and generally living the rather painful life of all poor northern kids born in that era. We and most of our gang lived in terraced houses. It was home, but we all dreamed of bigger and better things. At least I did, and spent the rest of my life seeking to better myself. It was the age of inside toilets. Don't laugh. Up until then, most people in the United Kingdom had outside toilets at the bottom of the backyard. I can recall seeing my first inside loo. It was right at the side of the kitchen in one of my wealthier aunties' semi-detached house, and I remember thinking how disgusting that grown-ups would poo in the house. Phew. I thought to myself, was it not healthier to stroll down the yard to share a little brick building with the snails, thereby keeping the house smelling, well, let's say, fresher? They would also save money by not using rolls of expensive fancy toilet paper, by using the squares of newspapers hung on a nail on the back of the door, which, incidentally, I personally, at my young age, left open so I could wave to the neighbors. This did change, you'll understand, as I got bigger. The zinc bath, kept on another nail in the yard, remained in use until my teens. Can you imagine a bath in front of the living room, fire half full of tepid water, after hours of filling it with a kettle heated on the gas stove and condensed fluid? The neighbors gave all sorts of excuses to come traipsing in and out to see my magnificent half-submerged torso. But I couldn't chat as I was, too busy, trying desperately to hide, you know what? I hope by now that they have all found a more exciting life. When the war ended, I guess the army figured they had no further use for their weapons. Trucks came round the town loaded with wooden rifle stocks for sale to the public. Hey, I don't blame the government for trying to recoup some cash. War is an expensive proposition. Our gang couldn't afford them, but we did hitch a ride on the tailgate of the truck to the bottom of the street. However, the perishing thing didn't stop. It went on and on, so we had to jump off when it slowed down. No injuries, but we did get our backsides tanned by our parents. Would the do-gooders please note that there is a vast difference between caring punishment and child abuse? I know it's a delicate subject, but I had to comment to clarify any misunderstanding. I assure you that I do not have any syndrome as a result of this type of punishment. Do you remember the pea guns? I'll bet Wendy does. She innocently shot me in the eye with her traditional homemade plywood pea gun. I know it was wrong, but I was just a kid, for God's sake. I reacted instinctively and threw my jackknife at her. It stuck in her leg and she ran off, not surprisingly, screaming like crazy. But quite frankly, the sad part was, I never got my knife back. We should probably stop watching those violent movies at the Bell Cinema. A good thought, but it soon turned out not to be necessary because Mr. P, the Bell's owner, had also picked up a trick or two. Rumor has it that he burned the place down for the insurance money. I don't know if he did or did not, but it gave us something to talk about. Ma'am and Dad bought me my first pair of long pants. Boy, were they ever sharp, gabardine, and the color rhymes with bigger brown. No offense, folks. That was a genuine color at that time. I was so proud until my pal Neville squirted them with bleach from his water pistol. His parents should have spent more time with him, but so should mine. I hit him over the head with my beach spade. Seeing so many uniforms during the war maybe induced me to join the Cubs and subsequently the Boy Scouts. This was a very enjoyable time of my life. Morals were established along with standards of cleanliness and survival techniques that I still live by. No, I'm not really pompous. I just appreciate the valuable lessons learned. I wish these organizations didn't have so many problems attracting the youngsters of today. They don't know what they're missing. The enjoyment they would get by singing Ginging Gooli Gooli Watcha. Seriously, it was great and highly recommendable. However, if you now feel your son would benefit from this kind of activity and you rush down to the local troop hut to enroll him, please promise me you won't send him off to camp with a pair of cutoff +4s with a big pink stain on the ass. Buy him some proper shorts. Trust me, he will really, really appreciate it. Talking of shorts reminds me of a very unpleasant incident that I've tried to forget. I can't recall my age at the time, but I was old enough to go to the cinema, the Palladium on Blackburn Road, on my own, in short pants. The bloke sat beside me, with a raincoat on his lap, must have taken a fancy to my shorts or my legs, as the feel of his hand on my knee interrupted my concentration on the film. I must have been young enough to be perplexed, scared, and completely baffled as to what to do. You can imagine where his hand wandered during the next few seconds, so I won't go into details. I guess I grew up fast and rushed back home. My dad asked about the film, and the honesty of youth compelled me to relate the incident. Off we flew to the scene of the crime, but the perpetrator had left. Does that episode leave me with some kind of syndrome? I am sometimes accused of being too intense about certain subjects. Maybe I have good reason. I remember jumping on my brother's motorcycle helmet one day and smashing it to pieces. I was simply angry about something he'd said or done. He was completely bewildered. And angry, of course. But I remember telling him that it was either his helmet or his head, and Mam would be furious if I'd chose the latter. I bought him a new skull saver at Charlie Robinson's for £4. Looking back on the educational system in England at that time, I believe the 11+ was the cause of missed opportunity for a lot of kids. It may be sour grapes, but I've thought about this over the years, and I'm convinced my recollection and conclusion are both correct. I sat my exam and must have been a borderline case, as I was summoned to an interview at Bolton School. It was the school. All went well until a panel of pompous twits asked me what my father did for a living. I was quickly ushered out after I told them that he was a coach painter. The fact that he was a highly qualified and hard-working tradesman didn't matter. He was not a professional person. Castle Hill Secondary Modern School accepted losers, so I was sent there after completing my time at St. Paul's. We were only poor, but we did see life. My dad was the proud owner of a motorbike, and he often took me to Blackpool to visit my granddad. He was separated from my grandma, who lived in Farnworth. It was always an enjoyable and worthwhile trip because he worked in some toy factory or store and managed to secure lots of goodies for me. That was fine, but carrying them home under my arm, perched on the bike pillion, was not. My arm was rigid for hours after we got home. I suppose my dad couldn't afford pannier bags. He eventually managed to acquire a launch sidecar, the type that looks like a boat. This meant that only 2 of us got pissed wet through on future outings. We continued to get further up the ladder, and Dad bought several vehicles over the next few years, which were laughingly called cars. They were the kind that you had to eventually pay a scrap merchant £5 to tow away. But I wish we'd kept them all. They would be worth a fortune now. Don't we all have similar wishes? One of these poor man's cars provided a giggle one day. Dad had taken out the floorboards, real wooden ones, and our Staffordshire Bull Terrier, Kim, jumped in thinking we were going for a drive. The bewildered look on his face, as he landed on the cobbles below, is unforgettable. Over the years, I had developed a great passion for swimming. I actually won a free pass to all the pools in Bolton and surrounding towns for a whole year. I used this to the fullest extent, and if I may say so, obtained many certificates for swimming and life-saving. This swimming enthusiasm, and hence my proficiency, continued for many more years. It was later replaced by exercises in water for the older person. Can you relate to that? At Castle Hill, I was given a chance to establish a firm principle, which I have strictly adhered to all my life. I will try never to be punished or penalized for the wrongdoings of others. This came about one day when the teacher had to leave the classroom and put the class brown-noser, you know the type, in charge of conduct during his absence. A premonition told me to behave, as I would certainly be a target. The jerk later gave our teacher the names of all the students who had misbehaved, including mine. The others all received a pounding from the slipper. Honest to God, it must have been a size 15. I refused and was duly given detention, but I never went. To cut a long story short, after 5 days of refusing the punishment and pleading my innocence, the astute teacher finally conceded that there must have been a mistake. He actually complimented me for sticking to my principles. I had soon to put this newly developed principle to the test. Somebody had carved his or her initials on the back of a chair in the science lab. You've guessed it. Mine. Another bout of successfully pleading my innocence prevented unwarranted punishment. It wasn't me, and if the guilty party is reading this, please contact Castle Hill and confess. I've been accused of this for long enough. Our class had the opportunity one day to go on a trip to the Civic Center Theater to listen to a visiting string quartet. None of us were particularly interested in this type of thing, so nobody accepted the invite. However, when we realized that the outing would span 2 periods of maths, we suddenly developed an interest in classical music and changed our minds. All went well until the quartet stopped playing, while the leader asked if the person in the audience eating potato chips would please refrain from doing so. I sat there with one hand holding the bag and the other hand halfway in for about an hour, scared to death to move. My apology to the leader after the performance was not easy, as I was concentrating on restoring the circulation in my arms. From age 11 to 13, it seemed apparent that my classmates and I were destined to be manual workers. The grammar school boys and girls would do all the thinking and decision-making. But there was still hope. I got a chance to sit the exam for Bolton Technical College and passed. My future prospects improved. I was now on the way to being a tradesman. The next 2 years' studies proved to be very interesting and extremely helpful for the rest of my life. At age 15, I left school and started an apprenticeship at the Farnworth branch of the de Havilland Aircraft Co. at the old former cotton mill on Gladstone Road. Don't look for it now. It's even more derelict than what it was then. It was here that I received a good grounding in the electronics field and made a lot of good friends. God bless your soul, Fred. The technology was amazing. We had valves measuring about an inch compared to the ones found in the home radios, etc. In the present world of microchips, it seems like that was another life. The huge plant at Lostock was my next place of graft. This was the home of the then well-known apprentice training school, providing full-time tuition and practical application in all aspects of engineering. It was a fun, time and again helpful in later years. I should tell you about when the foreman told me to get some practice on the various machines and make something other than a mess. I obeyed the royal command and proceeded to create a miniature guided missile, not a working model, just an ornament. Using just about all the lathes, grinders, and millers available, I finished up with a smashing piece of engineering, which I then had chromium plated. After bragging about it, as we all do, I put it in my lunchbox and headed for the gate, past the security guards. I forgot to tell you that this factory manufactured real missiles. Yes, the random spot checker chose to check my box. What a flaming commotion. It took us forever to confirm that it wasn't a miniature copy of the real thing. Not that interesting, but damned funny at the time. The next 2 or 3 years were quite arduous. I studied day and night at work in Bolton Technical College to obtain an engineering diploma. But enough of that and back to the social side of things. The end of the teddy bear and scout knife period saw the beginning of the teddy boy and Kosh era. I bought drainpipe trousers, mauve tie, and brothel creepers. I stuck my head in the gas oven to set my kiss curl in duck's ass. I then went on the prowl for something called dolly birds. God knows what I was going to do when I found them, but I guess one of my older mates would fill me in. Incidentally, do you remember the guy or gal that was so damned attractive that they could do no wrong, and even though they had the personality of a potato, they always got the gal or guy? Damned annoying. A father thought it was time for his son to learn about the birds and the bees from a professional. He gave him instructions where to go, and enough money for her fee. On his way there, the lad called in at his grandma's and explained his mission. She told him to save his money and took him upstairs to show him the ropes. He rushed home and told his dad, who screamed, "Do you mean to say that you screwed my mother?" Boy replied, "What's wrong with that? You screwed mine." An enjoyable but naughty weekly interlude was my trip to Yates's Wine Lodge in the town center. My best friend and I, slightly under drinking age, would consume 2 glasses of Australian white wine, purchase 2 packets of peanuts, and trot off to the Grand Theater to watch a girly show. At that time, naked ladies could pose on the stage, but they could not move, except when hit by a peanut, flicked by us from the balcony. Nobody complained, so maybe Gordon and I are responsible for the abundance of nudes we are now blessed with in every walk of life. A simple thank you will suffice. Rest in peace, Gordon. We had some great times. A hefty friend of my dad came to our house one day to borrow a saw. My dad obliged, and Big Norman said he wouldn't be long, as he just had to cut a railway sleeper in half. About an hour later, Dad went into the back street wondering why the task was taking so long. Maybe the saw was no good. The saw was fine, and the reason for the delay became clear. Norman was cutting the sleeper in half, lengthways. Dad returned to the house, splitting his sides laughing, and left Norman to finish splitting the sleeper. The very same Norman, the gentle giant, once saw a rag-and-bone chap sat on his cart being pulled up a steep hill by a struggling donkey. He shot across the road and literally ordered the man to get off and walk, as the exhausted animal had enough to do pulling the loaded cart. I wish I was that big. I'd stand at the top of escalators pushing people down. In order to save time in possible lawsuits, I will now simply ask you to relax and cast your mind back to your own teenage days. Add a little good and bad luck, and you should be able to imagine this part of my life. We're all pretty much the same at the end of the day. I was now 17, and for some reason got a yen to join the Territorial Army. Off I went to the drill hall, where I met an elderly major who directed me to the office. The sergeant asked all kinds of questions, including my date of birth. I told him 8th July, 1940, and he quickly advised me that I was too young and suggested I return the following year. My new friend, the major, caught me on my way out and welcomed me to the Royal Artillery. He was surprised at the account of my interview. Even though I wasn't in the Army yet, he ordered me back to the office to explain that I had made a mistake and my year of birth was, in fact, 1939, not 40. Boy, did I feel stupid, but it worked. The sergeant skeptically signed me on. I must have enjoyed the excitement and comradeship because after a few months I decided to try it full-time and join the regular army. Don't say anything, you guys. I broke my apprenticeship at de Havilland and rushed off to the recruitment office in Manchester. Military service, 1,958 to 1,964. On the 17th of January, 1958, without my dad's approval, I joined the REME, the acronym for Royal Electrical and Mechanical Engineers. I later found out that it meant rough engineering made easy. Of course, those handsome hunks I mentioned earlier said it was ruin every maiden eventually. A bit of both, I guess. It was really a beneficial time education-wise. I learned how to strip, clean, and fire all kinds of weapons. I wish I could remember. It would come in so useful in this day and age. Joking. Although it would be something to talk about with some of the yobos out there. The first day in the Army included getting kitted out with a uniform. The quartermaster measured my feet for the boots. You may find it hard to believe, but where I come from, feet were never measured. You just bought a pair of shoes that fit and didn't hurt too much. However, I was surprised when I was told that I had a size 6 inches length and size 8 inches width. I would have to have boots made to measure. This news couldn't have come at a worse time. The national newspapers were currently printing facts of a scandal about the armed forces wasting money. They stated that the Army had 1 million spare pairs of boots. My dad never understood why they couldn't find a pair to fit his son. Whilst my special footwear was being made, my mates were sweating it out on the parade ground, etc. I wasn't permitted to enjoy this activity until I had appropriate footwear. Shame. I didn't have to spend much time thinking about how I could delay production of the boots. The Army did it for me. By the time they were ready, basic training was over. I guess the Army assumed that I had learned all about fighting and bullshit during my stint in the Territorial Army or that my mates had tutored me at nights. They put me to work in the quartermaster's store for the whole 6 weeks. Silly, isn't it? But I graduated with the rest of them. All the lads had a good sense of humor and forgave me for charging them for all the equipment damaged during their training. One advantage of working in the QM store was £1 for them, £1 for me. Didn't cost anybody much, and it made life interesting. I indicated that my dad was not too pleased with my decision to enlist, and we had many an argument before I did. As a result, we fell out for a few weeks after I joined, and this is stupidly etched on my arm for life. My tattoo is 2 hearts with the word mother on a scroll. I'm probably the only person that will ever admit that tattoos really hurt, and I've never been able to pluck up the courage to have endured more by having it removed. 2 soldiers were in the barracks. One asked the other how to spell "whirl." The puzzled pal asked in what context the word was being used. His friend explained that he was writing home to ask his ma'am to send him some socks. War'll fit him. The other fellow then called him a daft sod and told him the right word was oosel. In their infinite wisdom, the Scrambled Egg Brigade decided that I had something to offer. They sent me off to a training school in Arborfield. I was the only thick regular on the instrument technician's course. The rest were national service chaps. Can you imagine what I went through? It was, however, a good incentive to pull up my socks and outshine all of them that would wipe the facial smirk off those served tradesmen. I did, and came top of the class, resulting in me having the first choice of the available overseas postings. However, an opportunity arose just at that time for certain qualified tradesmen to be transferred to the Army Air Corps. This was a corps recently formed to replace the RAF role in servicing the small aircraft used for such things as identifying and directing artillery fire and photographic missions. It sounded interesting, so I applied, and after completing another short course was accepted. I was transferred to an ex-RAF camp in Middle Wallop. Yes, there is such a place between Andover and Salisbury. The studying began again. This time it was aircraft instruments and electrics. Most of my classmates had been in the Army for yonks and had served overseas. I learned a lot. We all graduated, some with a pilot's license, but I'm afraid that my spectacles precluded me from obtaining this perk. The available postings were in the UK and overseas. For some unknown reason, I elected to go to the Middle East. My destination was Cyprus, and I flew out in May 1959. Cyprus is a beautiful island, and the climate is what I would call ideal. It was going to be good relaxing in the sun after a very strenuous 12 months or so, struggling to absorb all about optical and then aircraft instruments. Little did I know that I wouldn't have time for a pee, let alone relax. Dressed in my new tropical gear, shorts rolled up to about mid-thigh, and looking much like a cross between Billy Bunter and Jungle Jim, I reported to 653 Light Aircraft Squadron in Nicosia. What a welcome! The official greeter, a Royal Artillery Sergeant Major, bellowed as they do. "You have the wrong cap badge to wear your shorts like that." I reluctantly rolled my shorts down to just below my knee. They looked ridiculous. But I had my revenge later. The fact that I was the first NCO to arrive on the island wearing a powder blue beret didn't help. Previously, only officers had sported this ridiculous color of headgear. But I must admit it was fun. Other soldiers unknowingly saluted me. Somewhat deflated, I was taken to my tent. There was no bellboy, would you believe? I met a few inmates and then reported for duty. Basically, I would be responsible for maintaining about 30 aircraft used constantly in the aftermath of the hostilities on the island. This proved to be not an easy task, as I was the only Green Empire tradesman, the nickname for all except airframe fitters, of which there were about 20. This meant that as there were usually 4 aircraft at one time in the servicing hangars, each with a team of aircraft fitters, with me running about like a blue arse fly, I got charged once for leaving loose a fuse box cover that came off in flight. The pilot shit bricks. Fortunately, my CO admitted that I was overworked and gave me only a reprimand. I can't understand how the Army could ever have been accused of overspending. I was given a clapped-out old workshop vehicle containing a bench and a water manometer. Where was all the equipment necessary for testing and calibrating gyroscopic instruments, etc.? I put my past experience to work and humbly submitted my requirements to the boss, a likable and obliging chap. The overspending mystery was solved later.